Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the More Than You See podcast, where I have meaningful conversations with creatives about their mental health journeys. Please note, I am not a licensed practitioner or therapist, but an actor and a filmmaker who is deeply interested in sharing my own struggles and exploring the mental health of others. My hope is that these conversations bring you some joy, some personal understanding, and some tools so that you can build your own mental health toolbox. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode. Today is a very special episode where I'm going to be talking to my dear friend and the editor of the podcast, Kaytra Parkman. She is also a career actor. She has been doing this since she was 12. And with everything going on right now with the SAG contract that needs to be ratified and just conversations around AI, just what is going on in the world right now with technology, I thought that it would be really important to have a conversation about how that is affecting our mental health, how we are feeling about all of that, and just be open and honest with ourselves and with each other about how this is affecting us and how it's going to affect us in the long term. So I am really excited to have this conversation with her because she is also deeply in touch with her own emotions and has a real maturity when it comes to mental health. And I think that at the end of this conversation, you are going to feel a little more agency and a little bit more hope around what is happening and what we can do about it. And of course, as a little bonus, as part of this episode, we are actually going to be discussing an article that talks about Taylor Swift. That's all I'm gonna say, but it is a really valuable way that we wrap up the episode and allow you to have some tools for how you can work through everything that is going on right now and figure out some really good next steps for yourself, and for your community as you're experiencing all of this. And without further ado, here is Kaytra Parkman. Hi, Kaytra. Thanks so much for being here today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So I just introduced you in the little intro, but I'm so grateful. You are such a huge part of the More Than You See community. And I literally could not do this podcast without you. So I am just eternally grateful for you and just really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I'm looking forward to this. This should be interesting.
Yeah, of course. So for anyone listening, just to give some context, if you are listening in the future, or if you're listening to this on the day that this podcast comes out, um, SAG-AFTRA has completed the strike. And so we have a contract that is now being discussed and needs to be voted on by the membership in order for the contract to be ratified. And there's a lot of really wonderful things in this contract. And then there's some things that are really scary, especially around AI and the use of actors' images. And, one of the reasons that I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because you and I were just talking, like, post SAG-AFTRA meeting, you and I were just spouting about it. And I was like, this is so important for us to talk about in a public space. Because I'm sure that the way we're feeling is a lot of other people are feeling as well. And I think that I always find that it's important to call out some of the external factors as far as why we're feeling the way that we're feeling.
Mhm.
And you were kind of mirroring those things as well. And so I think that it's going to be really important to have this conversation about, this information landing on us, how we're digesting it, how we're feeling about it, and what we can do about it. That's kind of the breakdown of how this conversation is going to go. And for anyone who's listening who's not an actor, or not even a creative, someone who isn't necessarily feels affected by this, I would encourage you to continue listening, because I think one of the key parts of this that I say a lot is the fact that creatives kind of feel our emotions on a heightened sense. Like, what we are experiencing is sometimes heightened, but it is still the reflection of what other people are feeling. And I think that the anxiety and stress that is permeating everything right now, because of this, this new technology, that is going to hit every single industry. Every single job is going to feel this. And so even if you are listening and like you're not affected by this now, I think it's important to listen to the conversation and kind of prepare yourself for this affecting you and your loved ones in the future because as SAG-AFTRA and many people have said, and I agree, the cat is out of the bag. Like AI is here, this technology is here. But I think that it's important for us to digest how that is affecting us and what we can do about it in this
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to talk to you in particular, because I think that you have a very unique perspective and a perspective that's kind of different from mine. So I'm a like second act actor. I started acting when I was I started acting when I was a teenager and went to school for acting, but then I took a like a 7-year break where I moved to Australia. I ran a construction company. I had this whole other life, and then I moved back to LA at 28. And so I had this like period of time where I wasn't an actor. I was considering a different career entirely and then came back to acting and was like, no, this is 100% what I want to do. Whereas that is not your story. So I would love for you to explain a little bit about your relationship with your acting career.
Sure. Yes. I am one of those precocious people in LA who has wanted to be an actor for my career since I was like 4 years old. And I think I first finally came to the concept at that age, but it was around, I think, the age of 12 that I fully made the decision to pursue it as a career. And that was when, gratefully, my parents allowed me to start taking acting classes. I took dance and singing and guitar, and their whole thing was, if you want to be an actor, learn other skills so that your only thing isn't just acting and see if you like other forms of art as well. So I'm super grateful for that support. I know a lot of people didn't have that as, when they were young. And so from there, I mean, I was sending out headshots and trying to get an agent at the age of 12. I was doing it all on my own. I was, Googling how to do it and sending in hard copies of my materials to, at the time, I didn't know what I was doing. I was sending my headshot to like William Morris, thinking,
Right.
hey, rep me.
Uh-huh.
That didn't really go over well. But that sort of led me to applying for a performing arts high school where I ended up going to OSHA, which is the Orange County High School of the Arts, for 4 years, 10th through, or sorry, ninth through 12th grade. And from there, I didn't even entertain college, much to my counselor's chagrin. I went straight from high school into LA and auditioning and being repped and getting day jobs, and just I skipped over the college experience completely. That was something that I knew I wanted to do from like being a young teenager, and I still do not regret that decision. But it definitely forced me to sort of grow up really fast to survive Los Angeles. And I immediately got involved with a lot of, career coaching and acting classes and auditioning coaching, and anything that was available. I sort of did it. I treated it like my college experience, and it hasn't let up pretty much since. I mean, I would say the first big break I had, not big break as far as booking something, but big like time off would have been the pandemic. And so it I have been on like a one track sort of mentality since I would say elementary school.
And I think that, like, it's so important for us to have this conversation because while you have had some really incredible opportunities and, like, booked some really cool roles, in the traditional sense, as far as like what we read about in Variety and all of those things, like you are a child actor who hasn't like made it. And I
Right.
think that's really important to highlight because
Yeah.
there's so many people out there like you and like me that are
Yeah.
continuing to pursue our career and continuing to create art however we can. Um, but we haven't necessarily reached that. I mean, even the, like, SAG healthcare minimum, like, the, like,
Yeah.
goals that we had, it feels to me that like this introduction of AI and potentially the lack of protection, I really feel that with this new contract, it kind of seems like those goals are disappearing completely. And that's really scary and upsetting. And I want to, again, like, thank you for being on here and being vulnerable about this because it's like, what, like, how are you feeling right now? How are you feeling with everything?
I I'm in an interesting place right now. I've definitely oscillated between deep feelings of anger and frustration and also deep feelings of sadness and numbness. I feel a lot of just being fully checked out mentally, and honestly, sometimes that is preferable to some of the other things I've experienced, which is just like what I could only describe as grief.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because this was a conversation in an earlier episode this season about grief around careers and sort of what you pictured your life to be. And like you said, I mean, I've been at this since, let's say, 12
Mhm.
officially, and I have trained all of those years between various teachers and schools and studios and things like that. I have been repped by amazing agents. I have auditioned for incredible projects. I have done countless student films and web series and independents and things like that, many of which never left post-production, which is a whole other conversation.
Right.
But I did them.
Right. And you're an incredible
And
actor. Let's just say that. Like it's not
thank you.
just like that you have like put in all this work and like it doesn't show something. Like you really are an incredible actor.
So it has been an absolute turning point for me, and I feel like for a lot of people who are maybe in a similar tier. Honestly, though, I've talked to friends who are in higher tiers and who are full time working actors, and they're all honestly having a lot of the same feelings. So I feel like maybe this is more of a universal experience than I realize. But I am definitely grieving the loss of what I thought a career in Hollywood could potentially be. Now, it's been on this track for a while. This is not just the AI conversation. I mean, starting around, I would say 7-ish years ago, things really started to take a turn. Streaming was here to stay. There was a major focus shift to like the very few bona fide hits. Things started getting canceled more often. It became harder and harder to make a living due to the economy and the way our payment structures have been in the past. There's a million reasons for it, but sort of I've been watching it decline over the last few years. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. That just completely changed the industry. I mean, the fact that we stopped for as long as we did, and then for, some people went back to work, but a large majority of us did not. And we have not regained any momentum since. And as soon as we were sort of starting to kind of come out of that deep, dark hole, we got hit with two strikes, two massive, unprecedented industry strikes. And I swear to God, if I hear the word unprecedented one more time, so tired of living through unprecedented events.
Yeah.
But anyways, it's almost like, you get kicked down and then as you're trying to get back up, you get kicked down again and you get kicked so many times that eventually you just kind of lay there and you're like, maybe I just stay here on the floor for a bit.
Yeah.
But I, you know, something that I've been talking to a lot of friends about is we as a collective artist community have to decide, is this something we still want to do? And that's a question that I think a lot of us don't really want to face because there is this sunk cost fallacy of I've put so many years into this thing, I can't stop now. Or if I give up, what will people think of me? Or what will I think of myself? Or that little shred of hope that's still there. But like, what if that thing is right around the corner? And if I quit now, I'll never know. There's a million things behind that. But um the truth is, this industry and the way it works and the way we are producing art and content and whatever you wanna call it is different and will never be what it was when we were growing up, dreaming of this career, dreaming of what, making movies and TV would be. It's going to forever look different, and it might evolve into something amazing. I have no idea what's coming in the years down the line, but right now, holding on to something that no longer exists, I think is a disservice to our own mental health, to our own journey in our lives. And given how challenging the rest of the world is and society outside of the industry, if this is making you miserable, then that is something that needs to be investigated. And I think everybody needs to have a conversation with themselves that's evolving and ongoing. And honestly, the conversation should never stop with, is this something I still want to do? Why am I here? Like, why am I doing this? What about it is still interesting to me? Is that enough? Am I okay with it being just this forever? If I don't ever get this thing, am I going to regret the other sacrifices in my life that I made to accommodate this career? Because as many artists know, you sacrifice a lot to make this work.
Yeah,
Um, and so there are a lot of questions wrapped up in that. And I think we all need to face it, which is something I think a lot of us don't want to face.
for
And
sure.
it's something I'm currently facing right now.
Yeah. I don't want to I don't want anyone listening to be like, "Oh my gosh, this is like such a downer conversation," because I think that like it's really important for us to have this conversation. And I want to say that like at the end of this conversation, we are going to talk about some ways that we can like deconstruct how we're feeling and potentially use it in a way that will be empowering and help us through these times. So like I just want to say that, but I also want to first say that I think we talk a lot about collective trauma, and we're talking a lot about, the trauma of COVID, the trauma of just like being in a heightened sense of like fight or flight from COVID. And I think the reactivity that everyone feels, that I certainly feel when it comes to the AI conversation or other conversations where it's like these immediate gut reactions that we're having to things and being like, oh, I want to vote this way, or I want to feel this way or whatever. Like I think number one, it is I'm giving voice to the fact that it is perfectly okay that we are having those gut reactions, because we have truly been in a state of heightened anxiety and fight or flight since COVID. And I would actually say since Trump got elected, because when Trump got elected, there was very much this feeling of the fact that like the popular vote did not vote for him. Hillary should have been president if we just looked at the popular vote. And instead, this really damaging political figure became our president. And I certainly know that I've felt in a heightened state. Like, I still remember how I felt the night that he got elected and how disappointed I was. And I think that it kind of hasn't stopped, and there kind of hasn't. And one of the reasons I think is like this feeling of agency and this feeling of like a lack of control over what happens in our futures, because of so many outside sources that are either taking our rights of our bodies away from us, or that's one of the things that, I mean, to be blatant, like that's my biggest issue with the AI protections, or lack thereof, is that the lack of transparency when it comes to consent. You have to give, as an actor, you have to give consent in order for an AI double to be created of you and all of those things. But there is not, I feel, enough um legitimate language that's narrowing down like what that consent actually means, because it's it's like you can consent to one thing that is under an umbrella and think that like it's just going to be that one thing under the umbrella, but there's all these other spokes under that umbrella, and technically by giving consent you've given consent to all of those things. And I think that like that's the biggest issue, and that's the way that I feel like our agency has been taken away over and over and over again with COVID, with the rising inflation. Like I feel like there's just a constant attacking of our nervous systems, as far as like I mean, it really is, where it's like you feel like you're getting up and then you get hit down again, and you're getting up and you get hit down again. And I think that the biggest thing that you said that I want to highlight is like is is the journey right now going to be like, are you happy with the journey that you have right now, being consistent and maintaining that for the rest of your career, but also knowing that, like, unfortunately, like, what we have right now is actually really good in some ways, and it's actually gonna be completely different, like, it's gonna be changed, and sure, there would be, I hope that there are some real positive things that come out of this, but it's also completely understandable, that we don't feel like, there's potentially lots of positive things coming out of it. Um, and I think it's important to just like recognize that and validate our feelings when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's something I wanna add too is that this may be or this may feel like a downer conversation, quote unquote.
Mhm.
However, if we don't face reality for what it is and address each of these somewhat negative things head on, the more they will just continue to be pervasive. The thing with emotions, and I think you've talked about this on the podcast before with multiple other guests, but you know, feeling your feelings is a cute term, but it's really accurate because in order to feel joy and hope and fulfillment and any of those positive what we deem as positive emotions, you have to feel the other side of the spectrum. And the faster you honestly sit with this sucks, I don't feel good about this, XYZ, the sooner you can move through it into something that does feel more positive or at least neutral. And so I think as a collective, the more that we face what's happening, the sooner we will evolve through it. I don't know if some of this stuff is actually possible to like heal from. I don't know how what I feel. Yeah, I don't know if healing from some of this is actually should be the goal. I think evolving from it and using it is the goal. 100%. We are coming from an emotionally reactive place because why wouldn't we? As deeply sensitive people, artists, whatever you do. And honestly, I think human beings in general are deeply sensitive. I think artists just allow themselves to be a little more so. There is no way, even if you think that, "Oh, I'm fine from the last years. Like, I had it easy. It was fine. Like, didn't really affect me that much, like, personally. Like, I'm good." It has affected you in some way. Living on this planet, it just affects you, whether or not you're aware of it.
Well, I think that because I always like to look at the science behind it and be like, okay, let's look at this from a like scientific perspective. And scientifically, like our brains have a certain number, like have hormone levels, we have like all of these chemicals that are spinning through our brains, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. When we are constantly in a state of stress, it is much easier for our bodies to then become stressed again and again and again because that becomes our baseline. And so that's where, like it's easy for people to understand it when it comes to like the gym. Like if you go to the gym and you just do the same 30 minutes on the elliptical every single day, which I do sometimes because I'm like, that's my time to watch, trashy shows, but, like, if I go to the gym and I am on the treadmill for 30 minutes every single day and I never change from that, my body composition gets used to that as the baseline and it doesn't change. And so you have to continually add, rest periods and harder periods in order to feel that fluctuation, in order to feel your chemicals changing and your body to actually like do that self-regulation where you're like taking breaks and you're pushing harder and you're taking breaks and you're pushing harder, et cetera. Because we have constantly been in a state of fight or flight for years at this point, we are all in a heightened state of anxiety. And I think that that is just what we are walking around with. Like there is a reason why mental health spiked during the pandemic. Like, I do think that it's not just because people have become more aware of their mental health and the importance of, taking true rest and all of those things. Like, I think that that's part of it. But I also think that like our brain chemistry is actually changing because our body is becoming more used to a heightened like level of stress and anxiety. And so I think that when we have more stress that comes into us, like our careers potentially changing in these big ways, we are now reacting from a point of anxiety, not from a point of like reflection and a more stable place. Like we are already at a 10 and that's pushing us into, all of these heightened levels. And so I think that it's very valuable that people are saying right now, like take a breath, take a pause, look at things, and then make your decisions. Like I do think that that's really important. But I also think that it's valuable to highlight to someone that like your like increased anxiety that you're feeling right now is completely okay and it's coming from a biological and chemical place. You're not just reacting for no reason. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point as far as our body just wants to maintain homeostasis. And if
Mhm.
your homeostasis is a constant state of stress and terror, then it's going to get comfortable there. The thing that drives me crazy is that I think a lot of people relate to this, especially in regards to like social media usage and just the constant stimuli of being alive in this year. Even when we try to take a step back from that, it feels uncomfortable because our brains have now adjusted to this amount of stimuli, negative or not.
Yep.
And even though we know, like, this is bad for my brain, I should probably get off of Instagram and stop consuming this much terror in such a short amount of time. So then you turn off Instagram and your brain immediately goes, "Oh, no, no, no. I feel so bad. I need
Right.
something to fill that space." So you're
Grab
you're
and
like, "Wait a
touch.
second." You're like, "I felt bad consuming the thing, and now
Mhm.
I feel bad not consuming the thing.
Yep.
What is that?"
Yeah.
So that's, I'm laughing because it's just like the human brain is hilarious to me. It's like, pick one. No, it's the truth. We're so, especially for a lot of actors too, we are very online. A huge reason being that for years we were told you need to, market and sell yourself as a product online. So we're like very connected to the online community and being on these social media platforms, which I know is something that Helena talked about in the last episode or 2 episodes ago, whatever it was. There has to be a conscious moment of choosing over and over again, like, okay, why am I using this platform? Why am I consuming this information? Taking a breath. Where is this information coming from in regards to things that are important and relevant? Where are my biases? Like it's an excruciating process because a lot of us have just grown accustomed to not doing any of that and to just consuming flying off the handle, consuming flying off the handle, which I have done absolutely. Nobody is exempt from doing that at least once or twice.
Yep.
And I think something that's going to be so important now and pretty much anytime in the future is really taking back control of our usage of these platforms, how we're consuming information, how we are then resharing that information, and moving forward very slowly and deliberately. I think something that we've lost as a collective is taking information in slowly, thinking about it, and then thinking or reacting from a place instead of just this instant kind of sharing culture that can be very damaging if it's misinformation. And especially, I hate to remind everybody, but we have an election year coming up. So, we got to get this stuff in check now. And I think we're capable of it, but it requires some discipline.
Yeah.
And this is going to be immediately important for the actor community now as we vote on this new contract. And there will be a million other instances in which regulating ourselves is going to be the most important thing we can do.
Yeah. I agree. Especially because I think that like we want to portray society from an authentic place. And I think that's one of the things that to me is the scariest part of, building entire movies from AI doubles and not from actors themselves is like the imperfections, the mistakes that happen on set, like all of those things, like as a producer, that I've seen, the amount of times that mistakes have happened in scenes, and that's the gold. And like that is just not going to be authentic and come from a true human place with these, AI digital versions of ourselves. And I think that's one of the scariest things. But you're right in the fact that like what we can control is like how we still show up in the world and how we still show up, online still, if that's like an important part of our life. Like that's certainly something that like I try to regulate, but it's still an important part of my life. And just continuing to try and relearn how to monitor our emotions and react from an authentic place instead of from a heightened state. Um, that causes, like, immense reactivity, and, like, we're all, guilty of this, like, definitely myself included, and I think that, like I'm not saying that, like, we shouldn't be passionate about things, like, absolutely we should. I think that it is what you said where it's, like, acknowledging where we are, like, looking at the context, and this is just, like, mental health in general, like, when you are looking at your different aspects of mental health, like, looking at all of the different things that are affecting your mental health during that day, like, your environment, your friends, your community, your physical state, like all, your brain chemistry, like all of those things are uh like very much affect how we show up in the world day to day. And that is it's important to remember that like our trauma, our collective trauma, like how we are feeling because of everything that we've gone through is just another aspect of that it's just another thing that's now added into the equation that is affecting our mental states on a daily basis.
Absolutely. It's also important as artists and creatives and whatever term you want to use to make sure you have some sort of outlet that is not the career you've chosen.
Yep.
And that way, and this is something I've struggled with personally over the last few years, and I don't really have a personal answer for maybe what mine is, but I know how important it is to have a creative outlet that is not tied to the money you make, the career you're pursuing, whatever that means to you. That could be reading books,
Mhm.
or it could be, for me, a lot of times it's the acting class I'm in
Mm.
because I know the art made there is in a safe space and I greatly value that community. And that could exist separate from my career forever and I would still find immense value in it. I'm not doing it so that I can get something out of my career. I'm doing it because it brings me joy. And that leads me to another point. In these times where everything feels so heavy a lot of the time, seeking and cultivating joy is so incredibly important, as cheesy as it sounds. I honestly believe that the amount of time we spend, you know, digging into these very difficult conversations and being vulnerable and sitting with these feelings and these big kind of life concepts and the grief, all of that, you should also spend an equal amount of time cultivating and seeking and experiencing as much joy as possible, even if it's at the littlest, tiniest little thing that is silly to everybody else but you, or even if it's simple, it doesn't matter. It's like that is not something that we should shelve for any reason. The more you can exercise both sides of yourself, the better of an artist you'll be, the better human being you'll be, and also you'll have more energy to show up for things that do matter because a lot of these things are going to require us as a community to stand together and work towards something better. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot of energy. And if we don't have something kind of filling the well that's positive, we're all just going to check out. And I am someone who has checked out before on things because I just don't have any more energy. And so I see now with every day that passes, it's like, okay, cultivating some sort of joy or fulfillment in something that is stable outside of all of this gives us fuel to fight for something better if we desire to stay in a career like, let's say, being an actor or a writer or whatever it is. Because again, we are trying to portray, like you said, the human experience. And if we aren't human beings ourselves, what are we going to draw from?
Yeah,
You know?
for sure.
And if we're going to also differentiate ourselves from AI, and our value as human beings with imperfections and humanity, then we need to represent all of humanity and be irreplaceable in that regard.
100%. Okay, so I want to end our conversation with an article that I shared with you before, which is about one of our great passions that make us very happy and bring us lots of joy, and that is Taylor Swift. So this article was
Yay!
actually shared with me by my stepmom. She just sent it in a just sent it to me as a text, and I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. And this is exactly what we need to share um, and discuss, because the article is basically about how she took some really, really terrible experiences that she had and how she turned it into something even more amazing than the experiences before. And so the article is basically about, which anyone who is not a Swiftie and does not know, and actually, Kaytra, why don't you take this, because you probably know even more than I do as far as the
Oh,
history
man.
of this experience.
My friends are probably like, "There she goes again, talking about Taylor Swift. She can't ever get her to shut up." Um, Hi, resident Swiftie here. So yes, this article is it's spot on. It's really great, and I'm excited to talk about it. So the briefest of recaps for people who don't know what happened. Taylor Swift no longer owns the original master's recording to her first 6 albums of her career. And this was because the old record label that she was under, Big Machine Records, was sold along with her masters. And there's a lot of drama around that I won't take up time. You can read the article. We'll link in the description. But she was not given an opportunity to buy back her masters or to have any ownership of it. And it got sold to not just anyone, but basically someone that had been publicly bullying her and ganging up on her with his clients, and basically stripped her of her life's work up to this point. So it was extremely traumatic for her. She, this was basically, as she describes, her worst case scenario, not owning her music. And that being said, like the article points out, she could have just, you know, hung her head and been sad and, maybe wrote a song or two about it and just kind of accepted it and moved on, and her career would have looked massively different. But instead, she came up with a plan to re-record her first 6 albums. So this is what you've probably been seeing around if you're not, into Taylor Swift and you've seen the Taylor's versions of albums that you may have heard of before. These are the re-recordings of her first 6 albums. And so this way, she is able to own her music and also re-release music that has been in the vault for years. This is music that she was not allowed to release or couldn't put on the album for whatever reason. She had a lot less control over her career the first 6 albums. So, as you can probably tell, anyone with an internet connection has probably seen the massive meteoric rise of Taylor Swift this year across her Eras tour and these master re-recordings. Unprecedented success globally. None of this would have happened without her deciding to take matters into her own hands and take a really crappy situation and make something out of it. It has been amazing to watch. I thought, okay, she's just gonna like record some albums and then she'll release them and that'll be that. But it has been almost a way for new generations to experience these albums for the first time. So now there's all these kids who are listening to these albums for the first time. There's all these new songs. There are, album releases around each one. It's marketing brilliance, and it's also so inspiring to watch, to be like, oh wow, your worst case scenario can happen
Yep.
and you can choose to make something out of that.
Yep, for sure. And I think that it's important to highlight something that you said there that's another big red flag for me when it comes to these AI protections, is the fact that her music was sold. She couldn't buy it back. There was nothing that she could do in order to prevent her likeness, her musical likeness, in order to be sold to someone else. And that's something that's certainly in the conversation with AI, where it's like, if your likeness is owned by a production company and you've given them consent for it to be used in whatever, whatever, and then it gets sold, like that production company goes under or it gets bought out by a different production company, then that other production company that you didn't give consent to, you gave consent to the other production company, now also owns your likeness because it was purchased with
Mm.
in that deal. And so I just wanted to flag that as something like that's another thing that I don't think people are necessarily thinking about is like the repercussions of this. But again, this is for us to talk about what she did and how we can kind of be inspired and uplifted by what she did. And so, like Kaytra said, like we're gonna put in the show notes the link to this article so you can go ahead and check this out yourself. But at the end of this article, and this is an article on Inc.com, so it's like a legitimate, site. This isn't just like a Swifty um like fan article. This is actually a business article. And so at the end, what they're saying is basically like I'm going to quote directly from it. It said, if Swift had been able to simply buy out the rights of her original albums, she might never have had the idea or desire to re record these albums and release the original songs from the vault. How can you apply these lessons to running your business or life? And
Mhm.
so they are talking about this simple rule that they are calling use the difficulty to remember this important principle when we have these really challenging times in our lives, like what we're experiencing right now. And so I kind of, as our final few minutes together, want to talk through some of the questions that they have for us and for you and I to kind of have a dialogue around them. And this first one, the first question that they ask is, what don't I have control of in this situation? And what do I have control of in this situation?
Mm.
And this is something that my partner, Brian, has actually been wonderful as far as instating in control, out of control lists for me. This is something that I've had to do many times for many different reasons over the past year. And this is something that you can do not just with your career, but just your life in general. Like if there's things that are happening in your life that are really um, just causing a lot of stress and pain and difficulty, I think that it's really valuable to take out a piece of paper and write down in relation to this situation, like what do you have control of and what don't we have control of. So I would love to hear from you, like what do you feel in this situation that you have control of?
Yeah, so I think we have control over a cup actually more than I think we realize. The ultimate final decision and that kind of thing, of course not. But we have control over, first of all, how much information and stimuli we take in. As much as it sometimes feel like it's out of our control, we do have the ability and should have boundaries around these things. We have control over how much we want to get involved. And in that regard, if you're a union member, we can attend meetings and submit questions. We can pressure our leadership to clarify. We have control over helping educate other union members that maybe don't have the same amount of time as we do to digest this information or are maybe confused. We have control over how we vote and everything we do to prepare for that. So that's like on a micro level. I think also internally, we have control over at any given moment if we're wanting to do this or willing to do this.
Yep.
It may feel like, oh gosh, I'm repped, I'm stuck, I have to do this thing or whatever it is. But ultimately, you get to choose whether or not you want to audition, whether or not you want to be in acting class or whatever it is. That is 100% up to you, and it is okay to hang in there and keep going and push forward, and it is also in your control to maybe even take a break. You don't have to quit. You can take a step back, you can take the rest of the year off. It is gonna be okay. So I feel like there's a lot of things in our personal lives we can control, and I feel like those are the main points with in
Yeah,
regards to art.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's I just want to reiterate how like I certainly have felt, over the past 48, 72 hours, like my feelings with this career fluctuate, but my desire to stick it out and to continue doing this has not wavered. For me, that's something that like I'm very certain of. Um, is that scary and unsettling in some ways and just makes me feel just
Mm.
like I'm a little crazy sometimes, yes, but, like, that's something for me, myself, that has not waived, and therefore, I have control over my next steps as far as, like you said, voting, taking in the information, digesting it, and then deciding how I'm going to go from here because all of this is happening around us and we have no control. Nothing is going to stop it. But I do think that like we do have some agency and it's important to remind ourselves of that agency and also remind ourselves of that agency in small ways where it's even like, I know certainly with my, job, which you and I work together in our jobs and this is something I am constantly working at, but like having agency over when I'm available, when I am going to take meetings or not or anything like that. Like
Mhm.
those small ways that we can remind ourselves that we are not completely controlled by the system. Like we still do have control over how and when we show up in the world.
Yeah, and we also have control over the decision to process our emotions, to bring it back to earlier, it is within our control to sit down and to feel these things, to cry, to yell, to punch a pillow, to have an excited conversation with a friend, whatever it is, like that is up to us to allow ourselves to do that. Nobody else has that control over us, which is at least we have that.
Yeah, absolutely. The second question that they ask is how can I use this perceived disadvantage, setback, or challenge to my advantage?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one in regards to this particular situation. I think this is a great time. I hesitate to use the phrase "start from scratch" because I feel like that gives people anxiety. They're like, "Oh no, I've done all this work on my career up to this point, and it just like doesn't matter now," and all that. But in a way, that kind of gives you a lot of freedom to realize that, like, okay, what worked 5 plus years ago, 3 plus years ago, a year ago is no longer relevant or working. We can now recognize that we are all in the same boat.
Yep.
You are not behind or in front of really much of anyone unless you're talking about A-list celebrities that are already fine. The rest of the working class acting community are very much on the same boat right now. And this includes, people I know who are or have been series regulars. Unfortunately, a lot of those shows got canceled and everyone is kind of back to square one. A lot of agents did not survive the strike. It's just kind of all mixed up together. It's a big jumble. And that may, bring a lot of anxiety, but also the advantage of that or something that we can take from that positively is like, okay, like I can now make some decisions from a brand new kind of fresh start place.
Mhm.
Um, are my reps working for me? What kind of reps do I maybe want to seek out when things level out a little bit? Has the types of projects that I want to work on changed now that we're a few years older? Am I in a different category now? Do I like my materials? Let's get rid of it all. Let's start over. Like that is honestly, this is such a great time to do that because even if we're off of the strike now, it's going to be a while until things kind of pick back up to a momentum that feels semi-normal. It's going to be a few months. And then we
Yeah.
have the holidays and all of that. So this is a great time to not to feel like you have to, oh my God, I have to do all this actor busy work and oh no. Like don't bother your reps. Like let's take a breath. But this is a great time to organize your thoughts about everything. And so when things start to pick back up, you know, you have maybe a better plan of action. How am I going to approach auditions when they eventually come back? How do I want to structure my life in a way that supports that? I think there's a lot of space to cultivate something that's maybe healthier.
Yeah.
Um, and that's something that we can do out of this perceived disadvantage, I think.
And I think that, like, going back to talking about us as humans and us as, flawed beings and our humanity, all of that kind of stuff, like, the one benefit with all of this is the fact that, and it's being talked about in media across all industries, is the fact that, like, what is going to be created at least initially in AI is going to be very cookie cutter, because it's currently only being fed, what is currently out there, and that's like very, specific things. And so, like, like mistakes, like I was saying before, like mistakes that happen on set, like those kinds of things aren't, at least for now, going to be what AI can create. And so I do think that more than ever, it's important for people to figure out exactly, like, if you're staying as an actor and this is something you still want to do, um, as a career, as a hobby, whatever, like, what makes you unique, what makes your story and, like, your voice different, and focusing on that. And I think
Mhm.
that that is gonna be even more important as we continue throughout this, because, like, they've been talking a lot about, like, the whitewashing that's gonna happen, but I also think that just like the whitewashing of emotions, just like
Mhm.
um, there's just not gonna be as much human experience, I think, in things, and I think that it will, there's a real value then to people who are showing their humanity, who are showing their mistakes and their full range of emotions and, like, what makes them special. It is my,
Mhm.
huge hope that independent film is going to really take off, because at least right now, independent film can't afford the AI machines that the big studios have. And so I think that there is going to be potentially some, like, really incredible auteurs and, like, independent artists that are gonna come and, like, get some traction, because I think there is gonna be a thirst for non-computer generated material, at least for now. And I think that it's important for us to hold on to that, and, like, that there's some hope in that, as far as, like, again, Taylor focusing on her work and, like, what made her special, and being like, "This is I've got my work and I'm gonna, keep generating it," and us too, like, focus on what makes us special and keep generating art in the way that we can from an authentic place. It's just really important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, third question is, if this were happening to a good friend of mine right now, what advice would I give? And I think this is why I wanted to have this as a dialogue conversation with you, because I think that, like, I get a lot of comfort always talking to you about these things. And I think that I'm just gonna say, like, how valuable it is to have a community and to have a group of people who you can have open and honest conversations around that. I think that's really, really valuable. So I'm curious, as you're talking to your friends who are series regulars and who are stressed about this, the same that we are stressed about it, like, what advice or conversations are you having with them?
Some of this might be repetitive from what we've spoken on already this episode, but my number one thing when talking to friends about this current time we're living in is first, checking in with them as far as how they actually feel, and giving them the true space to say whatever it is honestly without judgment, without expectation that they need to be a certain way or answer a certain way or be positive or anything like that. But the advice is usually take a step back, not a step away, but a step back, and have an honest conversation with yourself about what you're desiring right now. Are you desiring more community and more friendship in your life? Do you desire a more robust creative outlet? Are you in need of some self-care and some time off? Are you feeling restless and need to get that energy out in some way? Like, what does your physical body and your mental body need right now? Um, Check in with that. And then, like you just said in the point prior, how, like, can we as a community work on being human together. Like, pounding out 1,000 hours of actor admin work is not being human. It's not living a life that's full and meaningful and connected to community and really all that beneficial anymore. To be honest, I feel like the most beneficial things for artists is to plug into their community and their purpose
Yep.
and whatever that may be, and that, that may manifest outside of the industry, and it might manifest into something very specific like a project or, community theater or whatever it is. But the number one thing I think everyone needs is space to process, a little bit of more downtime, because I don't know a single person that doesn't need a break right now. Community, 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 like meaningful friendships, the kinds of friendships that you would get in the car in the middle of the night to go to them if they needed something. Or, the kind of friendships where you can just sit in silence
Mhm.
together and it does not have to be anything. It doesn't have to be anything other than enjoying each other's company.
Yep.
And making sure the relationships you have with your family is something that is meaningful to you, if that's something that matters. Having creative outlets, like we mentioned before, having joy and finding silly hobbies and things to enjoy that maybe actually don't turn to anything at all. Maybe they don't have any kind of monetary value or gain, or you're not developing a skill, you're just enjoying something. The more we can be well-rounded as people, I think the more energy we will have to put ourselves through challenging situations like pursuing this career. And I think there is a side effect of that, which is you become more of an interesting person to work with in general. And when you have a lot of life to bring to the table, I feel like that is so much more valuable than the perfect headshot or that spreadsheet you made of whatever it is and sitting in your room alone on Instagram, one more post and someone will cast me. No, actually. I think that the more that you plug into your community and be a human being, the better it's going to be for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's like a really long response to that
No,
question. There
for
you
sure.
go.
Final question that they ask, and we kind of have highlighted this a couple times, but what is one thing that you can do right now in order to move forward from this place of difficulty?
That's a good question.
I was going to say, I think for me, and this podcast was actually the result of this, was that for me, I was like, it's important for me to digest my feelings and have a conversation with someone in in some kind of public space. And I think that's why, like, these conversations that are happening, these meetings that that are happening are really valuable, because it allows people to voice their concerns and not feel like you're screaming into a void, because that's the thing that is the most damaging, I think, right now, is feeling like this is only going to affect me, like I'm fucked and everyone else is going to be fine. And that is simply not true. And, of course, it goes back to the community, thing that you were just talking about. But even more so, I think that, like, we can tend to isolate ourselves. Like, during COVID, we isolated because that was what we were told to do. And I think that that can sometimes be our response, our fight or flight, is that we flight. We run away and, like, again, don't want to feel our feelings, but also, like, don't want to engage and all of those sorts of things. And I think that, like, this might be counter to what some people are saying, as far as, like, don't share your feelings, like, be protective about, like, your, how you're showing up for yourself online or whatever. But I think in this specific thing that is affecting us, because this is the thing, is this is very different than, like, the war that's going on in the Middle East. Right now, your feelings and your reaction to what is happening is relevant and valid. And so if you feel like you want to record a video of yourself talking about how you're scared because your job is now, your agency is going to be taken away as an actor, and you want to post it on social media, I would like to give you permission to do so, because it is just you expressing your own feelings and your own anxieties around it. And I think there's something valuable for that. If you don't, and you want to just record it so that way you can mark that for yourself as far as like, this is how I was feeling on this day. I think that that is equally as valuable. But I think that like, it's just important, because the social media frenzy that happens, and then people feel like they need to validate their feelings. Like, I'm not talking about like facts or, sharing like misinformation. I'm talking about like, however you are feeling right now is valid. And if that's something that like you want to share in whatever way you want to share it, I would like to give you permission in order to do so. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point.
For sure. What do you wanna do right now for yourself?
I think I'm trying to find a way of saying this that doesn't sound like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like trite, but I'm just gonna say it, is just letting go, loosening the grip on the past. You know, I think this is a part of the grieving process, but there is a step where you finally step forward and accept that whatever's coming next is gonna be a new horizon, it's gonna be different, and there's no way to predict it. And, I don't have to be a version of myself that existed years ago, that existed when I was a kid, that existed yesterday. The version of myself that exists today is the only one that's relevant. And letting go of the expectations that I've built up for, gosh, however many years it's been, well over a decade, and allowing it to be a fresh start, but in the sense that's not anxiety provoking, but in the sense of like, look at all this freedom that I have to be whatever version of myself is to come, and to maybe be pleasantly surprised by what could happen, with this industry, with maybe my own personal career journey, and not having a pressure on myself to decide right today or to make a final decision about my life or anything like that. I think it's just simply letting go. As again, simple as that sounds, like, oh, it's really nice. It's like, let go. Like, how do I do that? But I think it's a conscious choice every minute of the day. So that's what I'm gonna do to move forward, is just be like, loosen the grip. We're moving forward. It actually could maybe be better than we ever imagined. Who knows?
For sure. Absolutely. What a perfect place to end. Is there anything else that you wanted to share?
Oh gosh. I think we really covered it, but I really appreciate you having me on, and thank you for letting me go off on my little mini monologues about this subject. I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. And I hope this wasn't depressing for people. I hope that this was maybe inspiring in some way, or at least validating. If people are to take anything from this conversation, is something that I think you say in a lot of episodes, which is be gentle and be kind to yourself, and understand that everyone around you is also experiencing these challenges as well. So the more that we can kind of approach each other with that understanding and that kindness, I think the less hard everything will feel. So be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and get some rest. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kaytra. Thank you again so much for listening to this episode. I hope that this conversation left you with some joy and some understanding of your own agency, your own choices with all of this, because even though it does feel like so many things are out of our control, there are a few things that are in our control. And I hope that this conversation brought those things to light for you. I want to thank Kaytra so much for being a part of this podcast, for being my guest, as well as, of course, for her incredible editing work, her incredible help with this podcast in general. I could not do it without her. Please show her some love by subscribing to the podcast and giving us a rating or a review. You can do a special shout out to her. It would really mean the world to me, and I know it would mean the world to her. I also want to thank Ryan Ricks for his incredible composition of the intro and outro music. Please, as Kaytra said, remember to be kind to yourself. Remember that we are going through some really difficult shit. And it's okay to acknowledge that and to figure out ways through it. So be kind to yourself through all that. And remember that you and everyone around you is more than you see. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you again next week.